writers. Persephone Jane here for Right Up Our Alley, and today we're going to talk about 5 questions that you should answer when you are world building. During NaNoWriMo, I wrote a story that's kind of an alternate take on The Little Mermaid. We follow Eric as he decides to take the lead and get fins and go searching for the mermaid who saved his life. So we end up spending the majority of our story under the sea. And rather than just take the mermaid world from Disney and rehash it, I didn't want to do that, obviously. So I also had the introduction of some other characters that kind of necessitated a bigger and different world. Those characters being the Selkies, which for those of you who may not know is a mythological seal person from Ireland and that area. They are seals who can sing off their skin, and when they do so, they are human underneath and they can walk amongst the human world, and then they sing their skins back on and they go back to the sea. So there's lots of mythology around Selkies. And so in the story, Ariel's best friend is a Selkie. And so this undersea world now has mermaids and Selkies, and they're seals. So that changed a lot of the interactions that I was creating. So I had my book all broken up by chapter, and I found that the entire middle section of my book, I had nothing. I needed that space to develop my characters and their relationships, but what would they do while I'm developing that? That's where question number 1 came in so handy. What celebrations and ceremonies does your world have? So in the book, the mermaids and the Selkies have a huge festival every year to celebrate their friendship and their union under the sea. So this celebration, what does it entail? So I had to create that celebration, and the creation of that celebration ended up filling the entire middle of my book, which worked out well for me, but it also helped to create a lot of backstory. Like as I was working through the celebration, like why would this be in their celebration? Oh, because this other thing happened that maybe isn't in the book, but it helps me to feed the celebration with realistic and purposeful things that are happening from the past. So that's number 1, is what celebrations and ceremonies does your world have? Number 2, how do they honor their dead? There's a lot of anthropological philosophy on how honoring the dead can tell you a lot about a society. And I wanted to make sure that my society was purposeful in that way. So in the story, one of the Selkies passes away, and how they deal with that is a big part of that scene. And I didn't want to just make it a funeral as if it was a human world. I wanted it to be different. So, it took me a couple of days to figure out what that looked like, but it created a deeper connection of the Selkies with the ocean, which I enjoyed because all of the mythology about Selkies is mostly about how they would come onto the land, fall in love, and have families, but the sea would always be calling them back. And so they would always end up leaving their families to go back to the sea because the call was always too strong. So in this way that they honor the death of this character, it strengthens their bond with the ocean itself as kind of a nurturing mother to their species. And I greatly appreciate that aspect of writing, finding those connections and helping to strengthen what's already there. So number 2 is how do they honor their dead? Number 3, what is their fashion like? Right? Every world has their own unique, different kind of fashion. Even our world, you go to different cultures, which could be considered different worlds, and everyone has their own kind of fashion. Even if we have a lot of the same pieces, pants, shirts, etc., we wear them in such different ways that it makes a big impact on how we experience that culture and that place. So in my story for NaNoWriMo, Eric has come from the land with its fashion sense. He now has a fin and he's come into the ocean. And so that plays not a huge role, but just enough that I could add a little bit of curiosity and a little bit of quirk to his character with the difference in fashion. So number 3, what is their fashion like? Next, number 4, what kind of architecture do they have? Right? Same with here on land, right? You can go to any culture and you can see the difference in the architecture. You can see the difference in architecture in each of those places throughout the ages. It changes. It changes in time and it changes in place. So why wouldn't architecture in whatever world you are building be the same? The architecture that you see in your book in that world might not be the same architecture that your character would see if they went back 100 years in that same world. So these are all things to think about, and maybe you don't address them in your book, but you're still thinking about them. So in my book for NaNoWriMo, I addressed architecture under the sea with the difference between the mermaid structures and castles and homes versus the Selkies. And part of that helped me to solidify something that just came from the architecture, in that Selkies are part seal, and so they have to breathe air. Seals cannot stay under the water all the time. They have to breathe air. It's a necessity for them. So their architecture has to allow for that somehow, right? So I had to solve that problem. Solving that problem helped me to add that in my world, mermaids don't have to breathe air. They can, but it's very different than have to. And so not only does it change the way that their architecture is designed, but it changes the way that they experience breathing air. And that helped me add another dimension to each of those characters when they end up on land. Bonus. So that's number 4. What is their architecture like? And I recognize that explanation talked a little about the actual architecture, but for this reason, the architecture came in handy because it explained or it assisted in other things that needed to be addressed. So number 5, how would they battle an enemy? How would they battle an enemy out on the field? How would they battle an enemy in their own home? How would they battle an enemy out in public at an event, like a celebration of some kind? These are different things. They're very different approaches, and you don't have to include all of them, but knowing how they would and how each one is different and why is going to develop a greater depth in your world than if you just said they would spear them or whatever. So in my story, they have to battle a shark, which I felt was kind of a common enemy under the sea. Maybe like if I lived under the sea, I feel like many creatures under the sea would see the shark as an enemy. So I picked a shark. But the way that they battle it is unique. They don't just go pell-mell, throwing weapons and attacking the shark. They're strategic in the way that they do it, and they're strategic in a way that I felt is kind of unexpected. Their formation, like an army marching, they make a formation. They're not marching, like a big herd of people. They're in a formation. So I took that formation and I stood it up, and I realized that because underwater you can go vertical, right? You don't have to stay horizontal. So I stood up that formation, and in a vertical manner, that formation made a net, which I thought was very poignant for being under the sea. So that's how we battle our shark, is with a net formation of our Selkies and our mermaids. If I had kept it horizontal, would it have been as interesting? No. Would the shark have swam right over everybody's heads? Yes. It's a logistic problem, but it's also more interesting. So, how would they battle an enemy? That was number 5 that I had to answer. These 5 questions helped for me to create more depth within the world that I was creating under the sea. Let's go over them one more time. Number 1, what kind of celebrations and ceremonies do they have? Number 2, how do they honor their dead? Number 3, what is fashion like? Number 4, what is their architecture like? Their homes, their stores, their museums? Do they even have museums? Number 5, how would they battle an enemy? I hope those questions help you in your world building. And remember, there are plenty more questions for you to answer about your world, depending on your story and your characters and your writing style. You can Google a lot of them, you can Pinterest a lot of them, and you'll find so many other lists of questions that you can ask to build your world and make it as epically amazing as you imagine it in your head. And that's our goal, right? To bring our epic imagination right to the page so that readers love it. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to the channel and let us know how we're doing. We'll talk to you next time.